In the grand library of the cosmos, across billions of years and a million sentient species, the most dangerous entry is never the one titled K-Fu, but the one labeled Hom Dung K. My species, the Sonorians, define existence through data. We believe that with enough information, the universe becomes predictable, a grand, elegant equation. It was a beautiful, logical, and catastrophically wrong assumption. What follows is not an official report for the chorus, nor is it a warning. It is a confession, an archivist's addendum to a truth we thought we had already written. It began, as most great errors do, with absolute certainty, in the sterile, controlled environment we called the crucible. Our purpose was simple: to assess the species designated human, a new variable in the galactic equation, and to assign it a threat value. The subject chosen was, by our logic, a perfect median representation, a scientist, a xenobotanist named Aris Thorne. When he first materialized in the simulation, our data streams painted a portrait of profound biological fragility. Executor Vorlog of the Cthar, a being whose entire existence is a testament to physical certainty, made a low, rumbling sound in his chest, the Cthar equivalent of a dismissive laugh. And I could not blame him. The human's skeletal structure had a fracture tolerance below that of most avian younglings. His skin, devoid of scales, plating, or even significant subdermal layering, offered negligible resistance to radiation. Our models predicted that a mere 15% increase in atmospheric nitrogen would induce incapacitating hypoxia. He was, by every metric we valued, a masterpiece of poor evolutionary design. The first simulation was designed to be a baseline, a tranquil alien forest teeming with benign flora and fauna. We watched him work, and his movements held a quiet purpose that we misinterpreted as the timid caution of a prey animal. He examined leaves, tested soil acidity, and cataloged fungi with a scholar's focus, utterly unaware that three beings of near godlike power were analyzing his every heartbeat, his every breath, debating his species' right to a seat at the galactic table. Vorlog grew impatient, his voice a gravelly echo in the observation chamber. "Archivist, we have seen enough. This creature collects plants. It poses no more threat than the moss growing on my family's ancestral stone. Classify them as harmless, and let us move on to a species worthy of our time." And that was the moment, the precise inflection point where our elegant equation began to fracture. Because as I prepared to log the final classification, Matriarch Lyra spoke for the first time, her voice a whisper that silenced the stars themselves. "Patience, Executor. You are assessing the creature. You have not yet assessed its history." We did not understand her then. We saw only what was in front of us, one small, soft, unassuming creature, alone in a forest of our own creation. We saw a conclusion. We failed to see that we were only looking at the preface. Her words hung in the silence of the observation chamber, a variable we had not accounted for. But logic, like any dogma, is resistant to suggestion. It requires a forceful contradiction, a data point so violently opposed to the existing model that the entire structure collapses. Vorlog, his warrior's pride pricked by the matriarch's caution, provided that force. He keyed a new command into the simulation console, his massive digits moving with blunt certainty. "Escalate," he commanded the system. Scenario 2, Apex Predator Event. The tranquil forest simulation did not simply change, it soured. The ambient light dimmed, the colors desaturating as if drained of life. From the dense, simulated undergrowth, a new bioform emerged, a creature we designated the Krillilian Stalker. It was a biomechanical nightmare, six-limbed,
with chitinous plating rated to withstand small arms fire, and claws that could shear through ship-grade alloys. We had designed it ourselves, the ultimate predator, a synthesis of the most lethal traits from 100 conquered worlds. Its purpose was to test a species' flight or fight response. For the human, flight was the only logical option. The stalker moved with a liquid grace that defied its size, and the probability of the subject's survival dropped to a statistical 0. It struck, a blur of motion and malice, and its claw caught the human across the shoulder, tearing through the thin fabric of his suit and deep into the flesh beneath. The wound was catastrophic. Our biomonitors showed severed musculature, arterial bleeding, a death sentence. And in that precise moment, our elegant equation was shattered into a billion unrecognizable pieces. The expected vocalization of pain, the scream that every sentient being from a carbon-based life form produces under such trauma, never came. There was only a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Then, our data streams became chaos. Thorne's biometrics didn't just spike, they rewrote the very language of biology as we knew it. His neurochemical output surged by 3,000%, a flood of compounds our systems couldn't even classify. His heart rate, rather than becoming erratic with panic, locked into a rhythm so steady and powerful it resembled a percussive engine. It was not the biological signature of terror. It was the signature of ignition. Through the magnified view screen, we saw his eyes. The pupils had dilated, yes, but it was more than that. The focus, the sheer intensity in them had changed. It was the look of a being that had just been reminded of a fundamental, long-forgotten truth about its own nature. The stalker, sensing its prey was crippled, moved in for the final kill. And the human moved. Not away. He moved towards it. He lunged not with strength, but with a desperate, calculated purpose, grabbing a handful of soil thick with a specific black fungus we had cataloged earlier as gloom spore. He smeared the fungus across his own bleeding wound, a move so illogical it bordered on insanity. But then he ran, not in a panicked flight, but in a controlled tactical retreat, leading the stalker through a dense patch of the same dark fungus, kicking up clouds of its spores. The effect was almost immediate. The stalker's movements became sluggish, its neural pathways clearly inhibited by the potent mycotoxin. It was then we understood. He hadn't been panicking. He had been experimenting. He had used his own body as a living litmus test for the plant's toxicity. In the seconds the stalker was impaired, Thorne seized a fallen branch, thick as his arm, and with a speed that should have been impossible for his torn body, he jammed the sharpened end into the soft joint where the creature's forelimb met its thorax. There was no wasted motion. It was not the act of a desperate scientist. It was the cold, precise calculus of a survivor who had performed this kind of brutal triage before. The stalker collapsed, twitching. Its reign of terror ended by a creature with 1/10 its mass and a fraction of its strength. On the screen, Aris Thorne stood over the body, breathing heavily, his face pale. He looked at his ruined shoulder, then tore a strip of fabric from his own uniform and began to fashion a crude tourniquet, his movements slow, deliberate, and chillingly competent. In the observation chamber, there was only silence. The deep, profound silence that follows a revelation. Vorlog stared at the screen, his massive jaw agape, the concept of strength he had held for centuries now utterly meaningless. And I looked at my datapads, at the elegant probabilities and the flawless predictions. They were useless. They were lies. The variable was not insignificant. It was simply, terrifyingly unknown.
The observation chamber's silence was no longer of contemplation. It had become the heavy, suffocating silence of a failed prophecy. It was Vorlog who broke it, his voice a blade of raw iron tearing through the sterile air. "An anomaly," he growled, though the words lacked his earlier conviction. They sounded like a prayer against the evidence of his own eyes. A statistical fluke. The simulation was flawed, too simple. He turned to the console, his pride wounded far more deeply than the human's shoulder. He was a Cathar warrior. His universe was built upon the simple, brutal axiom that might makes right. The humans' victory was an intellectual poison, and Vorlog's only antidote was overwhelming force. "Increase the variables," he commanded, his voice now a roar. "Activate Cataclysm Protocol. I want to see this botanist analyze the geology of a dying world." The Crucible obeyed. The simulation did not just change, it screamed. The lush forest dissolved into a landscape of gray despair under a bruised violet sky. The air, now thick with corrosive aerosols, shimmered with heat from tectonic fissures that bled molten rock. The fauna, no longer singular predators, became swarming, hive-minded hunters, relentless and numerous. The challenge was no longer to defeat an enemy, but to survive an apocalypse. We gave him no resources, no tools, no hope. We gave him only our contempt and a world designed to erase him. And he began to adapt. He was not merely enduring the environment, he was dissecting it. With the calm focus of a master artisan, he started to dismantle our apocalypse and repurpose its parts. We watched, transfixed, as he used the predictable timing of a corrosive geyser to create an impassable barrier, funneling the swarming hunters into a narrow fissure. We saw him use a shard of volcanic glass to fashion a crude but brutally effective cutting tool. He learned the resonant frequency of the planet's dying core, piling specific metallic stones in a way that would tremble when the larger swarms approached. A primitive but functional early warning system. While Vorlog tried to break the man, I, with a desperation I had never known, tried to understand him. My faith in our data was shattered, so I sought a new one. I delved past the biological reports, past the societal metrics, and into the raw, unredacted archives of their homeworld. Designation: Earth. I was searching for the context for this impossible resilience. I was looking for the peaceful garden that could produce such a resourceful botanist. What I found was a slaughterhouse that had forged a weapon. The archives were a litany of horrors, a history written in blood and ash. I saw tribal warfare that lasted for centuries. I saw empires built on the bones of conquered nations. I saw the invention of chemical agents designed to turn the very air into a poison. I witnessed the splitting of an atom not for enlightenment, but to create a false sun that could scorch cities from existence. I saw pandemics, famines, and self-inflicted ecological collapses. Their planet had been trying to kill them for eons, and when it failed, they had simply taken over the job themselves. And suddenly, it all made sense. The cold calculus in Thorne's eyes was not an anomaly, it was an inheritance. The traps he laid with such chilling ingenuity were the ghosts of trench warfare. The way he turned his enemies' strengths against them was the echo of 1,000 asymmetrical conflicts fought by ancestors who were always outgunned and outnumbered. His refusal to surrender, even when his body was failing, was not bravery. It was instinct. The single unifying instinct of a species that had survived its own relentless, murderous insanity. I could not keep this knowledge to myself. I rerouted the archive feed to the main observation screen. At first, Vorlog was confused, watching flickering, primitive images of humans fighting each other with metal projectiles and sharpened steel. But then he saw the scale of it. The cities turned to rubble, the fields of bones, the mushroom clouds blooming in silent, monochrome horror. Vorlog, who had personally glassed moons and led charges against fortified worlds, watched in absolute stillness. He was a warrior who understood honorable combat, the clash of strength against strength. What he was witnessing was not combat. It was the art of extinction perfected by a species on itself for millennia. We had not trapped a man in our crucible, We had trapped ourselves in a room with a mirror, and for the first time, it was showing us the reflection of a monster we never knew existed.
The mirror of Earth's history stared back at us from the main screen, a silent, damning indictment of our ignorance. Vorlog, the warrior forged in the fire of 1,000 battles, did not move. He could not. He had finally witnessed a form of warfare so total, so absolute, that it defied his very definition of conflict. It was matriarch Lyra who finally broke the spell, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a collapsing star. "End simulation," she commanded. The apocalyptic hellscape vanished. The roar of tectonic chaos was replaced by the clean, sterile hum of the crucible's resting state. And there, in the center of the chamber, stood Aris Thorne. The wounds were gone, his uniform immaculate. But the illusion was broken. We no longer saw a fragile botanist. We saw the ghost of every soldier, every survivor, every desperate soul that had ever clawed its way out of Earth's gravitational well. He did not appear victorious. He looked tired. An ancient, bone-deep weariness that had no place on the face of a creature from a species so young. He was escorted out to a recovery chamber, leaving the three of us alone with the terrible new truth. "Explain, archivist," the matriarch commanded, her gaze fixed upon me. And so I began the most important entry of my entire career. What we witnessed, I started, my own voice sounding alien to me, was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration. We had been asking the wrong question. We asked, what are humans? When we should have been asking, why are humans? We searched for biological weapons, for natural armor, for physiological advantages. We should have been looking for the psychological scars. Our assessment failed because we evaluated a product when we should have been studying the forge that created it. I brought up a new set of images on the screen, not of war, but of evolution. Their entire history, I explained, is not a story of ascendance. It is a story of defiance. Their evolution was not driven by the pursuit of strength, but by a fundamental, cosmic refusal to lose. A defiance so profound it borders on a form of insanity. I have come to call it the doctrine of spite. They did not have claws, so they sharpened stones into spears, not out of a desire to kill, but out of spite for the predator that dared to hunt them. They did not have wings, so they built machines of metal and fire to conquer the sky, out of spite for gravity itself. They were plagued by microscopic organisms they could not see, so they re-engineered reality, building instruments to view the invisible and create medicines to spite death. I projected an image from their prehistoric era, a small, fur-clad human, huddled by a fire, staring out at a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. "It begins here," I whispered, "with a creature that is cold, weak, and surrounded by things with bigger teeth. It has no natural advantages, except for this." I gestured to the flickering fire, a stolen piece of a star, a tool, and it has intelligence, and it has the capacity to hate the thing that hunts it with a resolve that will outlast generations. The image changed to one of their scientists, a woman staring at a strand of genetic code on a screen. Their own world unleashed plagues that should have erased them from existence. They responded not with surrender, but with obsessive inquiry. They learned to dissect their own dead, to map their own biology, all to spite the disease that thought it could claim them. The final image appeared, a simple equation on a blackboard. E equals mc squared. And when they could not conquer their world, they chose to conquer the laws of physics themselves. They looked into the heart of creation and found a weapon hidden in the fabric of space-time, out of spite for their own limitations and for anyone who would dare threaten them as a whole. I turned off the screen, facing them in the dim light. We made the most fundamental error a species can make. We assessed the human as a biological entity. We failed to understand that a human is not a species, it is a concept. It is the universe's answer to a terrifying question. What happens when you corner a creature that has known nothing but struggle and you give it 2 million years to think about it? The answer is that you do not get a victim. You get a successor. The word successor hung in the observation chamber heavier than any element on our charts. It was a data point that reshaped the future. It was Vorlag, the proud Cathar warrior, who finally broke the silence, and his voice, for the first time, was devoid of arrogance. It was filled with a chilling reverence. Their history is a weapon in itself, he stated, not as an opinion, but as an undeniable physical law he had just discovered. He looked at me, his warrior's eyes seeing me for the first time not as a colleague, but as the harbinger of a terrible truth. Your findings are sound, archivist. We were blind. Matriarch Lyra rose from her chair, her presence commanding the very light in the room. She walked to the great window overlooking the now dormant crucible. "It is not blindness we are guilty of, executor," she said softly. "It is a failure of imagination. We are an old chorus. We have been singing the same song for eons. We classified species by their strengths, by their technologies, by their philosophies. We never thought to classify one by its scars." She turned, her ancient eyes meeting mine. "The classification harmless is an error of historic proportions, but hostile would be equally wrong. They are not conquerors, they are survivors. To label them would be to limit them, and what we have seen today is a creature of limitless adaptation." Her decision was made. In the Galactic Concordance, under species designation human, erase all previous classifications. Enter a new designation, unique to them and them alone. Chaotic variable. Chaotic variable. A perfect descriptor. They were not a predictable force to be countered, but a fundamental alteration to the universal equation itself. Later, as Dr. Thorne was preparing for his quiet, unceremonious departure, I felt compelled to ask one final question. I found him in a sterile transit chamber, calmly sipping a nutrient fluid, looking once more like the unassuming scholar we had first met. The monster was gone, leaving only the man, but I knew now they were one and the same. "Dr. Thorne," I began, my vocalizer struggling to find the right frequency. "The things we put you through, the scenarios, I must know. Did you feel fear?" He looked up from his drink, and the weariness I had seen earlier was still there, but it was now joined by a flicker of something else. Amusement? Pity? "Fear isn't an obstacle, archivist. It's a compass. It points you toward the problem that needs solving. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and then you use it as fuel to figure out how to make it stop." He took another sip, then added almost as an afterthought. "And as for what you showed me in there, we have a term for that back on Earth. We call it a bad Tuesday." He left shortly after, leaving me with his terrifyingly simple wisdom. But the story does not end there. As I was compiling my final log entry, sealing the new classification into the Galactic record, Matriarch Lyra approached me one last time. "There is one final data point that does not compute, archivist," she said quietly. "The initial request for this assessment, it was submitted anonymously, through encrypted, untraceable channels, but the resources provided to fund it, to grant us access to this level of simulation, were substantial. They were equal to the treasury of a small star system." I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the station's life support. "Who?" I asked. "We do not know,"
she replied, but someone else, someone with immense power, wanted to know what we now know. Were they looking for a weapon, or were they looking for a warning? That is the question that now haunts my data streams. Our grand library of the cosmos is no longer complete. A new, brilliant, and terrifying chapter has been opened. Humanity, the chaotic variable, has been introduced to the galaxy. But their story, our story, is no longer entirely our own. We are no longer the sole authors of our destiny. We are merely the readers watching a new narrative unfold. And the only question that truly matters is the one we cannot answer. Who or what is the one truly writing this story?